Human reaches alien girl during a throne succession, then the throne reshapes beneath human. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Commander Jake Harris stood at rigid attention in the gleaming reception hall of the Crimson Palace, headquarters of the Tan Dominion. His muscular frame reflected in the mirrored walls, glistening with a light sheen of sweat after completing the mandatory physical assessment. The grand hall around him buzzed with energy, but the task ahead weighed heavily on his mind. Today was not a day like any other. Today, his role would become much more significant. The Tan Dominion, with its sprawling empire across 17 star systems, had always been a powerful force in the galaxy. And now, they had requested him, Commander Harris, a decorated military officer from Earth. His reputation had reached far and wide after 3 successful tours in the Orion conflict, earning him the respect of both allies and enemies alike. But today, it wasn't his military accolades that mattered, it was his presence in the palace, ready to serve as the personal protector to Queen Nisara, the ruler of the Tan Dominion. He had been briefed on this task in the most official manner. The role was an honor, yet also a burden, as the political weight of this mission could shift the balance of power. But what he didn't know was that his assignment would soon involve much more than just protection. As he stood there, waiting for his briefing, the distant sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor, growing louder until the doors slid open with a soft hiss. Queen Nisara herself entered, a tall figure with bright red skin, silver armor, and an air of undeniable authority. She scanned the room, her eyes narrowing slightly as they landed on Jake, and he instinctively stood straighter, feeling the weight of her gaze. Without saying a word, she strode past him, and the air seemed to grow heavier with each step she took. But it wasn't just her. Behind her came the presence of the royal proxy, a clone of Queen Nisara, physically identical, yet lacking the authority of the real queen. This was not the first time Jake had encountered such an arrangement, but this time, something felt different. There was an undeniable tension between the two, the proxy and the queen, though they both carried the same physical traits. It was clear that the political maneuvering behind the scenes was far more complex than he had initially assumed. As the day progressed, Jake found himself assigned to the proxy for most of the routine tasks, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his presence in the palace was destined for something greater. The clone, whom he learned was named Lara, was not just a copy, she had her own thoughts, her own feelings, and, strangely, a level of warmth that contrasted sharply with the queen's cold, calculated demeanor. Despite their professional relationship, something about Lara's presence made Jake question the true nature of his mission. Was he meant to simply protect a figurehead, or was there a deeper role he was being groomed for? And as the day turned into evening, the palace corridors seemed to hum with an energy that Jake couldn't ignore. He had just begun to understand the stakes of his involvement when he found himself at the heart of an unexpected confrontation, one that would change everything. The throne succession, a long-standing Tan tradition, was set to unfold, but it wasn't just the future of the kingdom that was in question. Jake would soon find that the very foundation of the Tan Dominion's power would reshape itself beneath his feet. It was clear now, this wasn't just about protecting a queen or a proxy. It was about a legacy, a struggle for control, and a journey Jake never imagined he would embark on. With Lara at his side, a path was forming, one that would challenge not only his sense of duty but his very place in the universe. As the day wore on, Commander Jake Harris found himself lost in thought. The palace, with its gleaming walls and towering spires, had always exuded power, but today, it felt like something more, something that Jake couldn't yet put into words. As he walked through the halls, his footsteps echoed against the smooth, polished floors, each step heavy with the weight of his new role. The usual decorum of the palace seemed to shift around him, as if the very structure itself was anticipating the changes to come. He had been assigned to Lara for most of the day. The royal proxy, though an identical clone of Queen Nisara, possessed a warmth that seemed almost human in comparison to the stoic, commanding presence of the queen herself. It had been an odd feeling, following Lara around the cultural districts and attending diplomatic meetings where her presence was required but the Queen's was not. Jake had assumed the role of a mere bodyguard, but something was slowly beginning to gnaw at him. Something about Lara didn't sit right. There was a flicker of autonomy in her eyes, a spark of something more than just a mimicry of the Queen. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was testing him, pushing boundaries, seeing how far she could go without being noticed. The day was filled with meetings, each one more politically charged than the last. Jake kept his distance, never straying too far from Lara, though his mind often wandered. There was a strange comfort in her presence, a tranquility he hadn't expected to find in the midst of all the royal politics. And then, as they stood in the grand hall of the embassy, something changed. Lara turned to him, her eyes locking with his, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade. It was as though she had suddenly become more than a simple proxy, more than just a figurehead. She was real, with thoughts, with feelings, and with intentions that stretched far beyond what anyone had told him. "Commander," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You've been by my side all day. You've seen how this political game works, haven't you?" Jake was taken aback by the question. He hadn't expected her to acknowledge the tension that had been building all day. "I've seen enough to know that it's more than just politics," he said carefully. "It's about power. And control." Lara smiled, but it was not the smile of a simple proxy. It was a smile of understanding, of someone who knew the game as well as he did. "Power and control," she repeated. "Yes, but it's also about trust. The Queen trusts you, even if she doesn't say it outright." The words caught Jake off guard. Trust. He had never considered that. Not in the way Lara was speaking of. "Trust is a rare commodity in places like this," he said. "It's not something that's given easily." Lara nodded, her expression turning thoughtful. "And yet, you've trusted me more than anyone else today." Jake didn't know how to respond to that. It wasn't a question, but it was an observation that struck him more deeply than he cared to admit. Before he could gather his thoughts, a sudden shift in the air around them told him that something had changed. The moment had passed, and with it, the subtle connection that had begun to form between them seemed to dissipate, leaving only the cold weight of duty in its place. They moved on with their tour, visiting one final exhibit in the diplomatic gallery before heading back to the palace. The weight of the day had begun to settle in Jake's shoulders, but as they reached the gallery's exit, Lara's voice broke through his thoughts once more. "The Queen may not show it," she said, her words laced with an odd sadness, "but she needs someone like you. Someone who isn't just bound by duty, but by a sense of honor." Jake glanced at her, unsure of what to make of her words. There was a depth to her that he hadn't expected. And as they made their way back to the palace, he found himself wondering if the role he had been given was more than just protection. Was it possible that, in some way, he was meant to play a part in the reshaping of the throne itself? The thought lingered in his mind as they walked, the future uncertain, but the path ahead now filled with possibilities he had never considered. As the days passed, Commander Jake Harris began to notice something shifting beneath the surface. The palace was as grand as ever, but the air inside it had changed. What had once seemed like a simple political mission was now becoming something far more complex. Lara, the royal proxy, seemed to grow more distant with each passing moment, though their connection remained undeniable. It was as though the palace itself was shifting, responding to the tension between the two of them, and to the whispers of the throne succession. Jake spent more time with Lara, assisting with her duties and ensuring her safety, but it was during the quiet moments, when the bustling political activity slowed down, that their conversations took on a deeper meaning. They spoke less about the formalities of their roles and more about the future, about what was coming, and how everything was about to change. "You've been thinking a lot about the future, haven't you?" Lara asked one evening as they sat in the royal garden, surrounded by the fragrant bloom of alien flowers. Jake nodded, watching the stars twinkle in the sky above. "I suppose I have. It's hard not to when everything around us feels like it's about to shift." Lara's eyes, usually so calm and composed, flickered with something new, something that Jake had not seen before. A trace of uncertainty. "You're right," she said quietly. the succession isn't just about the throne. It's about what comes after. And what we decide to do with that power. Jake looked at her, studying her face for a moment. It was clear that she understood more about the stakes of this moment than she had let on before. Lara wasn't just a proxy, a mere clone of Queen Nisara. She had her own thoughts, her own desires, and perhaps even her own ambition. "What do you want, Lara?" Jake asked, his voice low. She glanced at him, surprised by the question. "What do you mean? What do you want, beyond your role here? Beyond protecting the throne, beyond serving the Queen?" For a long moment, Lara was silent, her gaze fixed on the stars above. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. "I want freedom," she admitted, her words carrying a weight that made Jake pause. "I want to decide for myself, not just follow orders, not just be a replacement for the real Queen." Her words hung in the air between them, and Jake felt something stir inside him. The more he spent time with her, the more he realized that the lines between duty and desire, between loyalty and personal choice, were blurring. It was no longer just about the throne or the political power at stake. It was about the people involved, about what they wanted, what they were willing to sacrifice, and what they could build together. Lara turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you think it's possible?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think it's possible for someone like me to have a choice?" Jake's heart skipped a beat as he looked at her. There was something in her eyes, something vulnerable, something real that he hadn't seen before. For a moment, he didn't answer. He didn't know how to. The weight of their situation, of the choices they both had to make, was too much to put into words. Instead, he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I think anything is possible," he said, his voice firm but kind. "But it's going to take all of us, every one of us, coming together and deciding what kind of future we want." Lara smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile that spoke of hope, of a future that was no longer defined by the throne, but by their shared will to shape it. As they sat there, hand in hand, under the stars, Jake realized that this mission was no longer just about protecting a queen. It was about protecting the future, about giving Lara, and himself, the chance to choose their own destinies. And as the days stretched on, Jake knew that no matter what happened next, he would stand by her side, ready to face whatever came their way. For the first time since his arrival, he felt a sense of purpose, something that was deeper than just duty. He felt like he was part of something bigger, something that could change everything. As the days unfolded, the tension between Jake and Lara only seemed to deepen. The political games that once felt distant and impersonal were now a tangible force, shaping their every decision and every move. The palace, with its towering spires and glittering halls, had become a labyrinth of intrigue, and Jake found himself caught at the center of it all. He had been brought here to protect, to serve, but as time passed, it became clear that his role was growing beyond that of a mere bodyguard. Lara, the royal proxy, was no longer just the queen's stand-in. She was someone with her own mind, her own desires, and, perhaps most importantly, her own understanding of the delicate balance of power in the Tan Dominion. As much as Jake tried to stay focused on his duties, he couldn't ignore the growing connection between them. It wasn't just the fleeting moments of shared conversation, the quiet glances, or the weight of the unspoken words hanging in the air. It was something deeper, something undeniable. They were both standing at a crossroads, two people from entirely different worlds, yet bound by the same uncertain future. "You've been quiet today," Lara remarked one evening as they walked through the gardens of the palace, the golden light of dusk casting long shadows across the path. Jake turned to her, surprised by her observation. "Just thinking," he said, his voice low. "About what's coming." Lara nodded, her gaze distant. "I know. It feels like the entire palace is holding its breath, waiting for something to change." Jake glanced at her, studying her face in the soft light. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something more in her eyes. A sense of uncertainty. "Are you ready for that change?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lara looked at him, and for a brief moment, Jake saw a vulnerability that she rarely allowed to show. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've always been told what to do, who to be, what my purpose is. But now, I'm not sure anymore. Everything is shifting, and I don't know where I fit in this new world." Her words hit Jake harder than he expected. He had always known that Lara was more than just a clone, more than a proxy. But hearing her speak so openly, so honestly, made him realize just how much weight she carried. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Jake said gently, stepping closer to her. "None of us do. But we can figure it out together. You don't have to do this alone." Lara's lips curled into a faint, sad smile. "I appreciate that, Jake. I really do. But I can't keep relying on others. I need to find my own path." Jake nodded, understanding. He knew what it was like to feel like you were meant for something greater, yet unsure of how to get there. He had been in that place once, before he had been given this mission. Before he had been thrown into a role he never expected. The two of them stood there for a long moment, the only sound the rustling of the wind through the trees. Jake could feel the weight of the moment, the quiet understanding that had settled between them. It was clear. Now that they both had choices to make, decisions that would shape the future of the Tan Dominion, and perhaps even the fate of the galaxy itself. As they continued their walk, Jake's mind raced with possibilities. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain, he couldn't let Lara face it alone. Whatever came next, he would stand by her side. And as the shadows grew longer and the stars began to emerge in the sky above, Jake realized that the path they were about to walk wasn't just about political power. It was about the choices they made, and the trust they placed in each other. Together, they would face whatever came next, and together, they would determine what kind of future they would create. The tension inside the palace had reached a boiling point. Every day, the stakes grew higher, and Jake could feel it in the air. Something was about to change, and soon. Queen Nisara, still holding the reins of power, had kept a firm grip on her position, but Jake could sense the cracks in her control. The throne that had stood so tall, so unyielding, now seemed to waver on the brink of collapse. It was a dangerous time, one where loyalty and trust would be tested, and Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming. Lara, the royal proxy, had become more than just a figurehead. There was a fire in her eyes now, a determination that hadn't been there before. She had been forced to play the role of a substitute, always in the shadow of the queen, but it was clear that she was no longer willing to stay in the background. "I don't want to be just a stand-in anymore," Lara had said quietly one evening, her voice barely a whisper in the grand hall. "I need to make my own choices. I need to be more than this." Jake, who had grown increasingly close to her over the past weeks, could feel the weight of her words. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for the future of the Tan Dominion, for a chance to decide her own destiny. And Jake found himself at a crossroads, too. His role as her protector had evolved. He had started this mission as a simple bodyguard, a soldier following orders, but now, he was standing at the heart of a revolution. This wasn't just about protecting Lara or even the Queen, it was about helping shape a future that neither of them had ever imagined. As they walked through the palace, their footsteps echoing in the silence, Jake couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would Lara take the throne? Would the Queen relinquish her power? Or was there something even more complicated at play? What happens when everything changes? Jake asked, his voice barely audible. Lara glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment before she answered. "When it changes, we have to be ready. We can't let fear stop us. We can't let tradition bind us." Jake nodded, his thoughts racing. Tradition was a powerful thing, and the people of the Tan Dominion had lived by it for centuries. But Lara was right, change was inevitable, and if they didn't embrace it, they would be left behind, trapped in the past. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Jake asked, stopping in his tracks and turning to face her. Lara's gaze softened for a moment, and she gave a small, determined smile. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm not going to wait any longer." The air around them seemed to thrum with energy as the weight of her words sank in. This was no longer just a political game, it was a fight for the future, a battle that neither of them could afford to lose. "Then we'll face it together," Jake said, his voice steady. Lara nodded, and for the first time since they had met, Jake saw not just the Queen's proxy but a leader, someone who would not shy away from her destiny. The path ahead was uncertain, but Jake knew one thing for sure: whatever happened next, he would stand by her side, ready to face whatever challenges came their way. The palace, with all its secrets and power, could no longer hold them. They were about to step into the unknown, and Jake was ready. Together, they would reshape the future of the Tan Dominion. As the days continued to pass, the palace became a place of quiet tension, filled with whispered conversations and secret meetings. Jake could feel it in the air, the storm that was gathering. The Queen, once so unyielding, seemed to be losing her grip on power, and the undercurrent of change was sweeping through the Tan Dominion. Lara, though still a royal proxy, had begun to make moves of her own, carefully and deliberately positioning herself for what lay ahead. The more Jake spent time with her, the more he realized that the power of the throne was not just a matter of position, it was about influence, trust, and the ability to inspire loyalty. Lara had those qualities in abundance. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to make your own decisions?" Lara asked Jake one evening as they stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out at the vast expanse of the city below. The sky was darkening, and the distant lights of the city twinkled like stars, but there was an intensity in her voice that made the air around them seem charged. Jake turned to her, surprised by the question. "I suppose I've always had to make decisions, but they've always been about duty," he said, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "For others, not for myself." Lara nodded slowly. "That's how it is, isn't it? We live in a world where duty and loyalty are supposed to define us. But what if we could choose? What if we didn't have to follow someone else's path?" Her words struck Jake deeply. He had always lived by a code: honor, duty, and loyalty. It was how he had been trained, how he had learned to navigate life. But as he stood there, listening to Lara, he realized that perhaps there was more to life than just following orders. Perhaps, like her, he could choose his own destiny. "I've never thought about it that way," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of uncertainty and curiosity. Lara smiled, a small, knowing smile. "It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? To have the power to decide your own fate, to shape your own future. But it's also liberating." Jake took a deep breath, his mind racing with the implications of what she was saying. For the first time since he had arrived on this planet, he began to see things differently. His duty was no longer just to the Queen or the palace, it was to something greater. It was about standing beside Lara, helping her reshape the future of the Tan Dominion. "You're right," he said finally. "We can't keep living for someone else's vision. If we want change, we have to make it ourselves." Lara turned to him, her eyes bright with a mixture of hope and determination. "Exactly. And we're going to do it. Together." The promise in her words filled Jake with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He had always believed in honor, in duty, but now, standing beside Lara, he realized that the future was theirs to shape. As they stood together on the balcony, the wind carrying whispers of change, Jake knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he would walk it with Lara, ready to face whatever came next. And with each passing day, as the palace walls seemed to tremble with the weight of the shifting power, Jake felt a growing sense of hope. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future, for the chance to forge their own destinies, free from the chains of the past. The days had passed in a blur of secrecy and whispered plans. As Jake walked through the halls of the palace, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The Tan Dominion was on the edge of something monumental, and every decision, every step taken, could tip the balance one way or another. Lara, once merely the Queen's proxy, had become something more. She was now a leader in her own right, and Jake found himself at her side, standing together as they prepared to reshape the future. They had spent the last few days strategizing in quiet, hidden corners of the palace, carefully avoiding the prying eyes of the royal court. Jake could sense that the time was fast approaching when their plans would no longer be whispers in the shadows but a full-blown confrontation with the powers that held the Tan Dominion's throne. "It's almost time," Lara said one evening as they sat together in a secluded chamber, her eyes reflecting the dim light of the room. "The Queen has grown weaker, and the court knows it. They've been watching me, waiting to see if I'll step up. But I'm not sure if I'm ready to take that step yet." Jake watched her carefully, sensing the uncertainty in her voice. He knew she had the strength and the determination to lead, but the weight of the crown, the responsibility, was something entirely different. "You've already taken that step, Lara," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You've been leading from the moment you decided to stand up for what you believe in. The people are watching, yes, but they are not just looking at you, they're looking at what you can offer. And they need someone who can give them hope." Lara turned to him, her gaze softening as she took in his words. There was something about the way Jake spoke, the way he believed in her, that made her heart ache with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "What if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Then we fail together. But I don't believe that will happen. I've seen you fight for what's right, seen the way you inspire people. You're not alone in this. You have me, and you have all the people who believe in you." Lara's eyes searched his face, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. There was no palace, no politics, no royal court, just the two of them, standing side by side, ready to face whatever came next. "Thank you, Jake," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "You've given me more than just protection, you've given me faith." Jake nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'll always be here for you, Lara. Whatever happens, we face it together." The weight of her words, the sincerity in her eyes, settled deep in his soul. He had known this was more than just a mission. It was more than just a job. This was about standing up for something bigger than himself, bigger than the throne. This was about fighting for a future they could shape together. As the evening drew to a close, Jake and Lara stood together in the quiet of the palace, the first true moment of peace they had shared in what felt like forever. They didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, they were ready to face it with open eyes and hearts full of determination. They had come this far, and they weren't turning back. The world around them was changing, and together, they would be the ones to lead that change. The palace, once filled with the hustle of politics and court life, now seemed to hold its breath. The walls, cold and impersonal, watched as Jake and Lara prepared for the inevitable. It was no longer just about navigating the web of royal intrigue, it was about taking a stand, about doing what they both knew needed to be done. The time had come to act, and they would face the consequences together. Lara had been planning carefully, speaking with her supporters in secret, gathering the resources she needed to make her move. But now, as the day loomed closer, Jake could see the strain in her eyes. She had always been strong, but the weight of what she was about to undertake was a burden that no one could bear lightly. "Are you sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. "Once we do this, there's no going back." Lara turned to him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before her eyes softened. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said quietly. "I can't keep living in someone else's shadow. If I don't act now, nothing will ever change." Jake nodded, understanding the depth of her resolve. He knew this wasn't just about the throne anymore, it was about freedom, about forging a new path, not just for herself but for everyone who had been trapped under the weight of tradition. "Then we do this together," Jake said, his voice firm. "No matter what comes, I'm with you." Lara smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was the first time in days that Jake had seen her look like this, confident, determined, and ready to face whatever the future held. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've given me the strength to do this. I couldn't have made it this far without you." The words meant more to Jake than he could say, but there was no time to dwell on them. The moment had arrived, and they had to move swiftly. The palace was already a pressure cooker, with courtiers whispering and plotting behind closed doors. They had to act before anyone else could. Lara had chosen her allies carefully, those who had proven their loyalty, who believed in the change she represented. Now, it was time to make their move. They gathered in the hidden chambers deep within the palace, away from prying eyes. Jake stood watch at the door, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon, ready for whatever might come. Lara, standing at the center of the room, addressed her closest supporters. Her voice, once uncertain, was now strong and unwavering. It's time to take the throne. We've waited long enough, and now, we will claim what is ours. The room filled with murmurs of agreement, the air thick with anticipation. Jake's heart raced as he watched Lara, realizing how far they had come. She was no longer the royal proxy. She was the leader, the one who would shape the future of the Tan Dominion. As the doors to the chamber opened, signaling that the moment had arrived, Jake felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it, the point of no return. Lara stepped forward, her eyes meeting his once more. There was no fear in them, only the quiet strength that had carried her this far. "Let's do this," she said, and Jake, without hesitation, followed her lead. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would reshape the destiny of an empire. The atmosphere in the palace had reached a breaking point. Jake could feel the weight of every step as he moved through the corridors, his heart racing with each passing moment. The time for waiting was over, and everything that had been carefully planned was about to unfold. Lara, with the support of her closest allies, had made her move. There was no turning back now. Lara stood before the assembly, her presence commanding, her voice steady and filled with conviction. She addressed the room, her words echoing off the cold stone walls. "This is no longer about the throne or the queen's power," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "This is about the future of the Tan Dominion, a future we will shape together, one where every voice matters and where no one is left behind." Jake watched her, awestruck by the transformation he had witnessed in her. She was no longer just a figurehead, a mere replacement for the queen. She was the leader of the Dominion, and in that moment, Jake knew she was ready for the challenge ahead. The room buzzed with excitement as her words sank in. The supporters who had gathered around her were not there just for a political change, they were there for a revolution, for a new way of life. For a moment, everything felt possible. As Lara finished speaking, there was a palpable shift in the room. The weight of the old order seemed to lift, replaced by the energy of something new, something powerful. Lara turned to Jake, her expression softening as she locked eyes with him. "We're ready," she whispered, the words carrying more weight than she could have imagined. Jake nodded, his resolve clear. "We're with you, Lara. Whatever happens next, we face it together." The door to the chamber opened, and the palace guards filed in, their armor gleaming in the dim light. Jake felt his pulse quicken, but he didn't flinch. This was it. The moment they had worked for had arrived. The guards, once loyal to the queen, now stood at a crossroads, their allegiances torn between duty and the promise of a new future. The leader of the guards, a tall alien with piercing eyes, stepped forward, his posture rigid and formal. "The queen demands your presence," he said, his voice cold but not without a trace of hesitation. Lara met his gaze with steady eyes, her response measured but firm. "The queen's time has passed. It's time for a new leadership, one that represents all of us, not just the elite." The guard's expression hardened, but he did not move to stop her. Instead, he nodded once and stepped aside, signaling that the way was clear. With a final glance at Jake, Lara stepped forward, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the palace. Jake followed closely behind, his heart pounding in his chest. This was more than just a palace coup, it was the beginning of a new era. As they approached the throne room, the doors swung open, and Lara entered, her gaze unwavering. The queen, seated on the throne, looked up, her eyes narrowing as she took in Lara's presence. The room was filled with the weight of years of tradition, and for a moment, it felt as though time itself had come to a standstill. "You've come to claim what is mine," the queen said, her voice laced with both anger and resignation. "I've come to claim what is ours," Lara replied, her voice calm but full of conviction. "The throne is not yours to hold forever. It is time for change." The Queen's gaze faltered for the briefest of moments, and Jake could see the cracks in her once unshakable resolve. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Lara stepped forward, and without hesitation, she took her place beside the throne. The Queen, her eyes searching for the strength to fight back, finally spoke. "This is not how things are done," she said, her voice trembling. Lara met her gaze and spoke with a quiet but powerful certainty. "No, this is how things will be done from now on." The throne, once a symbol of unchallenged power, now stood as a testament to the changing tides of the Tan Dominion. The future was no longer uncertain. Lara had claimed her place, and with Jake by her side, they would lead the Dominion into a new era, one built on unity, trust, and the promise of something greater. The Queen's reign had ended, but Lara's had just begun.